Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you could join Steve and I for this presentation tonight. You may already know this, but I've got to tell you, Steve Linn is known for his biographical sculptures of some of the most influential artists and intellectuals in history. His interest began as a child when his imagination was sparked by biographies and radio dramas. This interest continued into his adult life as Steve is focused on the interesting lives of individuals. It's one of the most exciting things to me about getting to meet Steve years ago and learn about his work. I was so impressed by who he picks, how he picks them. His new exhibition, Some People I Admire, Steve Linn's documentary sculpture, is currently on view at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art through November 28th, 2021, and it explores Steve's interest in biographical studies. Steve, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
It's great to be here, and I'm really pleased with the museum and everybody who's helped out in the installation and making this exhibition possible.
I think I can speak for the crew to say that they were very honored to work with you. They appreciate your exactness, your precision, and that you could do this in your sleep. You know how it works. You created it in the first place. So I think that's quite wonderful. And here you are, travel all the way from France to be here in Fort Wayne with us for this week of installation. And I have to say that that's the first time I've watched you and worked with you in an installation. Every other time I've encountered you at some other event, it was already put together. It fascinated me on your engineering skills. Can you tell me a little bit, tell all of us a little bit about how you're such a great engineer?
Well, ironically, when I was a child, my father wanted me to be an engineer. And so he and I, when I was very young, made things and built things and put things together. And when he was a high school woodshop teacher when I was young. And the mechanics of putting things together so that they stay together and that they stand up was very important to him. And he transmitted that interest to me. And I've always known that throughout my career, I always wanted to print up a card that said Steve Linn, instinctive engineer.
I think that really is quite on spot. And clearly all the influence of your father and the energy you put into it was on display all week long. Every time we together bring a piece by piece out of its crate and start laying it out for assembly. Two things struck me is that, boy, you really do know how to make things join and stick together and stand up. And then secondarily, I thought there's so much thought that you've put into each work as you were creating it. You were already thinking about the engineering problems and how to solve them. And it's evident when you see the work come out of the boxes that this is a really complex puzzle that you're going to show us how to put together.
Well, the thing that's important in the engineering of any sculpture is that the engineering is invisible. It has to be part of the aesthetics of the piece. In other words, you can't just stick a wooden, support under something because that would destroy the aesthetics of the piece. So in the concept of designing a piece, you have to initially think about how is this going to stay together? How is it going to stand up? What are the mechanical elements of it? Because of the multi-material nature of the work, also things have to, go together. Now, putting metal next to glass, for example, can be very iffy because there's a possibility that it would chip or it would break or whatever. So you have to deal with an insulating layer, but all that has to factor into the aesthetics of the piece itself. And even though I make sculptures about people that I admire, the first thing that's important when you look at a sculpture is it pleasing to the eye? You know, what are the design elements? It doesn't matter who the person is. You know, it's not just about telling the story, because the first impact that anybody gets when they look at a piece is, what does this look like? You know, am I attracted to it? Do I want to come into the piece and learn more about who that person is? Or, you know, am I put off by it and would I just walk away?
Well, you know, earlier today, you also touched on something I think that's very important, and you do it so successfully. Each person you pick, the other elements not only aesthetically align, but they're very central, very germane to who that person is. And you may only have a handful of other elements, but you look at those elements and in combination, it's a pleasing to the eye effect, but also it tells that person's story.
Well, those are the two things that are important for me in making the sculpture that I do. I've chosen an area that is unique. There aren't many artists who, I mean, there are a lot of portrait artists, you know, who do an image of somebody, you know, but my idea is to get deeper into who the person is, what their work is about, and to tell stories. And so you have those things, and you have to tell the story in a, it isn't like a 2.5 hour documentary film or even a 20-minute documentary film. You have to capture the essence of the person immediately, and then using several elements that are indigenous to their ideas or personality or whatever, then you try to get the viewer to think about who that person is and want to go to the Google or the internet or whatever and find out even more. Because a lot of the people are not super famous, but you know, they're important to me, so I want other people to know, you know, who they are and, you know, what they're about.
Well, and the group of people that you've created work about that are in this exhibit, talk about a couple of them and why they're important to you.
Well, there's one piece in the show called "I Dreamt I Was a Model for George Segal." Okay, so I did this piece about 2 years ago, and I hadn't done a self-portrait since 1998, when I did 2 profile self-portraits for the front and back cover of a catalog. So I did my right profile for the front catalog cover of the catalog, and my left profile for the back cover of the catalog. But this time, I didn't want to do just a piece about me. So in the 1962, I guess, or 1963, when I was in college at the University of Illinois, George Segal came to do a lecture. And I just totally fell in love with his work and thought that, you know, because of the theatricality of it and the environmental nature of, you know, multiple figures together to create a scenario, that became really important to me. So in the sculpture world, my earliest references were George Segal and Ed Kienholz, who is not in this show, but I have done a piece for him, about him, which is in the Dennis Museum in Traverse City, Michigan. But anyway.
I've seen, by the way. I've seen there.
Um, but so, I wanted to do, a piece about George Siegel. And ironically, in the 1970s, uh, I won in the early 1980s, I won the Prix de Rome in sculpture. And I went to Rome, and while I was at the American Academy in Rome, I got a call from the American consulate saying, George Siegel is in town, and he wants somebody to help him with the Italian language and to kind of shepherd him around for a week because he's doing a series of prints. So I got to hang out for a week with one of my early idols, and it was an extraordinary experience.
Oh, I'm sure. That's the best story. I love that. Wow. Very important.
Yeah.
Very important. And I too am a fan of both Siegel and Kienholz. I mean, I love their work. When I was a student, I remember looking at images. I had never seen one in real life before, but looking at images of both their work and thinking, these guys are geniuses. They're so getting into someone's situation in life and context, I guess you'd say, so thoroughly and just so engagingly. So I share your love for these two.
Well, one of the interesting things about the two of them is that they're storytellers also, and they take multiple images to do that. And the irony of Siegel and Kienholz's monumental works juxtaposed to a painter like Giorgio Morandi, who did these still lifes with bottles, and by just using a cast of maybe 15 or 20 different bottles, did 100 paintings in his life, and each one was like a theater piece. And here was a guy working, in a format that was tabletop size, and these guys were working in formats that were theatrical size.
Oh, it was so much more dramatic. And to a young art student, it was mind blowing. And it also, it might have had the same effect on you. That's not the way I thought of sculpture. I thought we were going to take a piece of stone or wood and carve a figure or a cat. And this was exciting. This was like really happening.
I mean, if you think about Kienholz's Barney's Beanery piece, which is, Barney's Beanery is a dive bar in Los Angeles, and in that piece, he recreated the bar. There's 10 life-size figures. The faces of each figure are clocks stopped at 10 minutes after 10. And he also, behind the sculpture, had a hot plate with stuff cooking on it to recreate the smell of Barney's Beanery.
Incredible. Incredible.
And Siegel's, people walking across the street and waiting for the stoplight to change. There's a real stoplight in the piece, and there's people waiting on the corner for the stoplight to change.
And nobody had ever done that. It was terrific.
Yeah.
Well, your mention of the smells in the bar make me want to ask you some questions about the piece Maxwell Street. When I look up and I see Polish beef, I think, oh, I can't smell it, but I can taste it already. Talk to me about that piece a little.
Well, that piece also comes out of my youth. When I was 13 years old, my father took me to Maxwell Street to buy me my first suit.
Okay.
And Maxwell Street was a street of Jewish push carts and haberdashery shops, tailor shops, where they made custom suits or you could buy off the rack. And the very interesting thing about that street is that that's also where Black blues musicians played. and the shop owners would run extension cords out of their shops so that the musicians could hook up their amplifiers and their microphones and and all that stuff. And there was this symbiotic relationship because the haberdashery shops, attracted people to come down there, and the musicians also attracted people, and it worked both ways. And the piece that I made focuses on not only the Vienna Polish sausage and kosher hot dogs, and the suits hanging off of the Haas Brothers Clothing Company sign, because as you walk down the street, on the awnings of the establishment, they would hang pants and jackets and stuff. So it was very outdoors and in the street, as opposed to closed behind doors shops. And anyway, when my father brought me down to Maxwell Street to buy the suit, we heard this music, and he let me stay the whole day, and I became a lifelong fan. And several of the musicians that many famous musicians migrated from the South, Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and several others, got their start on Maxwell Street. But what I did was I featured 5 musicians who never became famous, although they have been recorded, and who stayed on the street and worked for tips their whole life. And those 5 musicians are Stovepipe Daddy, Arvell Gray, Hound Dog Taylor, Carrie Bell, and Blind Jim Brewer. And I've been a fan of the blues, and it's the kind of music that I listen to in my studio. I listen to blues and classical music when I work, and
it's a perfect fit.
Yeah.
and it has a perfect start when you're a kid going down to get a suit. I think that's wonderful. And moving on to the image that an image of a work that you just mentioned, is that I think is so interesting in terms of dreaming about being a model for George Segal. You tell that story so well. And in your dream, did you think you might have to wrap yourself in that plaster apparatus?
Absolutely.
And you would have been willing.
And in the sculpture, there's even the plaster bandage starting on my face.
Yes, I saw that, and it's marvelous. And it's also wonderful too, because I think that you're stepping up for George, who is still revered, but at the same time, people loved him and then moved on. And I think I love it when you bring us back to, let's think about Kienholz and Segal and remember how great they were.
Well, and they still are, and
it's true.
I mean, even though they're not with us anymore,
and that's what we all hope for, right?
Yeah,
we want to be remembered.
I mean, we hope the work lives on, and as do I,
Yeah.
But that's not why we make it. We make it because we're in the moment.
Well, and I think that's something that I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's something that I think people need to hear more of, because we're not in the studio. Even I, who am so close to artists in the studio, we're still not in the studio when you're making work. And I think lots of conjecture gets put out there. Oh, I think he was thinking about that. Oh, he must have been doing this. Well, really, what you're doing is in your heart and in your head, and we're not privy to that until you tell us a story.
But it's also it's also interesting because, you know, like you put work out in a museum, in a gallery, you know, wherever, in a private collection, people see it, and people interpret on their own. I mean, I try to put some text, you know, when I display work, so that people can, you know more. But also people bring their own life and their own experience to work when they see it. But as one is working in the studio, this is something that you and I talked about today also, is that when you start a work and you do a sketch, you get an idea. Okay, at least this is the way I work. You get an idea. Then I start doing research about the idea, about this person. You know, like it may be somebody who I'm fascinated with. I've read a book about. I saw an article in a newspaper. The ideas come from all different ways, but a lot of it has to do with I read a lot, and books have always been very important to me. So anyway, you get an idea, you do the research, and then you start on paper sketching and making the idea come to some form of fruition, and then you develop those sketches into a final idea. Now, as far as art goes, that's where it ends. After that, you go into the studio, and it is nothing more than manufacturing. That's where the engineering comes in. That's where that's where your skills as a craftsman come in. But your intellectual and creative skills have ended there. Now, as a painter, that's different, because painters are often much more in the moment, especially abstract painters. You know, so their creative process is actually in the making. But in sculpture, the creative process is before the making.
That you say that so well, so clearly, because it's true, and it's an overlooked fact. And I think once you get that in your mind as a viewer, you have a higher appreciation of the piece. You think, okay, and I know that in my years of teaching art history at university level, and also prior to that, being in studio classes, one of the things that was frustrating is that people, you know, there was a phase in American university life where you'd be rewarded for dreaming something nice up. I've in my mind, I have a great piece. Although here's what I have to admit, I don't know how to make anything. Well, you haven't come all the way then. And
No.
so you're a great example of somebody who dreams it up and it's wonderful, and makes it and it's equally wonderful. That's a powerful combination.
Well, every sculptor and painter who is reasonably successful that does that. I'm not unique in that notion by any means. I mean, every creative painter and sculptor that I know works in that. I mean, you know, like people who just can think of it and not do it are incomplete. So, you know, they're not artists because they don't have anything to show for it.
Well, I couldn't agree more.
Except, I take that back, except if you are, there were several artists back in the 60s who came up with ideas and then called up a fabricator and said, make me a cube out of steel.
Yep.
You know.
You're absolutely right.
But if there's anything more than geometry or, you know, if there's more shapes or architectural things or juxtapositions, then in fact, the creative aspect is in the making, is in the manufacturing as well.
Well, and you are particularly good at and ingenious about how to make that manufacturing process result in the piece that is in your mind that you've dreamed up.
Well, part of it is that I work in several materials, you know, so I've had to develop a lot of different skills. You know, obviously, because my father was a high school woodshop teacher, I started in wood. So for the first number of years, I worked only in wood, you know, but I got to a point where I pretty much could make anything I wanted out of wood. And I wanted to work with something that was dangerous and you know, and wouldn't necessarily behave, you know. So in my 20s, I was teaching set design in the theater department at Smith College. And a friend of mine, Mike Brenneman, was running the Foundry program at University of Massachusetts in Amherst, which was just down the road. And, you know, one day he said to me, yeah, you know, come on over. I'm doing some bronze casting. You know, you get a kick out of it. So you know, he knew I was a sculptor, obviously. And so I went and, you know, and I said, wow, you know, could I do that? You know, could you teach me? So he, you know, I worked along with side of him. He taught me. And then I combined bronze and wood for about 15 years. And there's certain detailing and stuff that you can get in bronze in when you're working with the wax and all that stuff that you can't get in wood. And so putting those two things together, and the warmth of the wood and the coolness of the bronze and all that stuff, you know, begins to push you deeper and deeper into the possibilities of visual presentation. And then in the early 1980s, I got an idea to do a sculpture about Imogen Cunningham, who is a California photographer, who was California photographer in the F64 group with Ansel Adams and Minor White, et cetera, et cetera. And she worked a lot with an 8x10 view camera. And the plates, the negatives in an 8x10 view camera are on glass plates. So I thought, why don't I put her on a glass plate? And I thought, you know, how am I going to do this? I have no idea. Am I going to do, you know, serigraphy? Am I going to do photo emulsion printing? And I was walking down the street in New York where I lived at the time. And I saw a restaurant that had a window that was sandblasted with some images of the Moses image from the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And I thought, that's what I want. I want to sandblast. So you go into the glass. So you're sculpting the glass as well as just capturing the image of the person.
Wow.
So I went to the Yellow Pages. And I looked under sandblasting, and I found a company called Carved Glass Incorporated. I said, that's it. That's what I want to do. So I called them up and I said, hi, I'm Steve Linn. I'm a sculptor. I've been, you know, I'm represented by Louis Mizell Gallery in New York and in Manhattan. And I got an idea for sculpture, and I was wondering if you would teach me your technique, how to sandblast, so I could do this. And he said, no. So I said, why not? You know, so he said, well, because every time I teach somebody, they open up a business in competition with me. And, you know, we've been doing this for 3 generations. We've done all the glass work in Rockefeller Center and in these really important places, and, our skill level is, like superior to anybody. And so I said, well, that's why I want to learn from you,
Sure.
So
Best.
I said, I'll tell you what, like I will sign a non-competition letter, legal and all that stuff, and have it notarized, and, anything you want, as long as you do that. So he said, and I said, it's just for my sculpture. He said, okay, we'll do it. So for about 2 years, I went out to their shop in the South Bronx and worked, like a couple of days a week or whatever, and learned how to carve glass from them. And so now I'm combining a third material into the work: glass, bronze, wood. And even that's evolved over the years. I've added steel, I've added aluminum, but basically my three basic materials throughout my career have been those materials. And in the show, there's a unique aspect of glass, and that is in two of the pieces, I've incorporated holograms.
Oh, tell me about that. I love them. I saw them first when you debuted them, I think at the international show.
Right.
Perhaps. And I just couldn't figure out how you did it. I look at them today. They're super. They're so engaging. Talk to us about why you thought it up and how you pull it off.
Well, one of the pieces is about Weiwei, and who is a Chinese artist, who is probably one of the most famous artists on the planet right now. And at the time that I made the piece, Ai Weiwei was not allowed to leave China. And so I thought one of the ways that I could depict him in the piece is by doing these holograms. And there's two kinds of holograms. There's first stage holograms, which are three-dimensional, but they appear behind the glass. So in the Ai Weiwei piece that I did, the holograms I made, well, I'll backtrack a little. One of his famous works is a photographic triptych of him dropping a 6th century Han Dynasty vase. So there's 3 photographs, and one he's holding the vase. The second one, it's in midair, and the third one, it's smashed on the ground. So, and another one of his pieces is that he took a bunch of these, vases that he actually even found them in flea markets and stuff, because in China, like a lot of this stuff is readily available, and it isn't so precious as it would be to us. And he painted Coca-Cola on some and dripped paint on others, and made these assemblages of 15 or 20 vases that he found. So these vases were important to his iconography at the time. So what I did was I made 3 ceramic vases, fired them, painted on them, and then made holograms of them. And on the ceramic vases, each one has a low relief head of Ai Weiwei. So in fact, with his vases and with his head, he's trapped behind the glass of the holograms. And then in the piece, the holograms descend to a degree. It starts off, there's a cast glass vase with a relief head up on the upper left-hand corner, and then the holograms. And then on the ground is a smashed vase. And the way I did that was I made the vase out of wax and I put it in the freezer and it got very brittle. And then I did exactly what he did. I held the vase up outside in the concrete driveway of my house, and I let it drop on the ground, and it smashed into a number of pieces, and then I cast them in bronze. So
Terrific.
in the second piece that has holograms is about Stephen Hawking. Now, those holograms are second stage holograms. And in fact, they come out from the glass panel. Now, what a hologram actually is two thin pieces of glass with a silver nitrate coating that the hologram is by using lasers is encrypted in that silver nitrate film. The laser process is very extensive and requires a concrete table that weighs tons, so there's no vibration, and these mirrors that costs $10,000 a piece because of their precision grinding and their convex, and then the way the lasers are bounced off of the mirrors and hit the object that is being, recorded, and then transferred to that film. But eventually, what you get is 2-3 millimeter thick pieces of glass with this film inside. And all it takes to view the image is a light source. There's no electricity, there's no nothing, but you put a light source on it and you get this 3D thing that jumps out at you. So in the Stephen Hawking piece, you have three elements. One is that he's known for is the Big Bang. So the creation of the universe. So I have, cones that explode out, in stars and all that. And then singularity, which is the matter disappearing into a black hole. And then the convergence of black holes. So the three holograms in that piece are the Big Bang, singularity, and the convergence of black holes. And then also in Stephen Hawking's case, he had ALS for over 50 years, which is absolutely unheard of. The normal life expectancy of somebody with ALS is 2 years, 3 years maximum, and he lived for over 50 years with it. And so
Incredible.
there are 3 cast glass heads in the piece, which show the progression of his physical changing from the ALS. And then that piece is also surrounded by 6 kind of graphic heads of scientists who influenced his career.
It's a remarkable piece. I have to agree with you. It's stunning. And one of the things we witnessed today as a team working with you is that to make these holograms come alive, we've got to come up with very strong lighting systems to spark that. And all of a sudden you see them like nothing else. They're just amazing. But if you're 2 or 3 lights short, it doesn't quite work yet.
Yeah.
So I was pleased we were able to master that. And you told me it would take more light. When we put more light on it, all of a sudden, you wake up to the fact that that's exactly what you've got to do. And they're beautiful. I mean, I would hope everybody comes to see the show, but especially those pieces with those holograms. They're quite remarkable. And
one thing that I was interested at some point in my career to do is to show one of them in a science museum. And actually, I have all of the objects that were used to make the holograms.
Wow.
You know, because in the Stephen Hawking piece, for example, all of the objects were blown glass and etched. And as the lasers bounced off the glass objects, it was only where the etching is that comes out in the final hologram. And where the clear glass was, it disappears. So, you know, I would like to sometimes show, you know, as an educational thing, maybe, you know, how holograms are made, you know, with, you know, a minimalist laser setup, the objects, and then the final sculpture.
Oh, I think that would be exciting to see. Wow.
You know, like the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, or, you know, the Ontario Science Center in Toronto, or, you know.
Oh, it'd be perfect. It would be the perfect place. Now, you know, equally impressive, I have to say, to the holograms is a piece that I just keep turning around to look at once again, because I'm not sure it's going to maybe fly off the wall. You did a wonderful piece about artist Yves Klein, and Yves Klein had a famous photograph of him jumping out of a window, flying
off of a wall.
Yeah, okay. So talk to us about that piece. And what stuns me is I think your glass piece of Eve is coming right out into the room and it's going to crash any minute. Talk to me about it.
Engineering.
Engineering. Thank you.
Well, I mean, Yves Klein was an artist who totally fascinates me because of his virtuosity, because of his incredible creativity. He was involved in performance art. He was involved in happenings. Most people know him for the specific color of blue that he created and invented, and held the formula for throughout his life, and in fact up until 2 years ago, when the family released the formula to a French paint company. And so when I made this piece, I was actually fortunate enough to use the real Yves Klein blue as the, you know, several of the background items in the piece. But also part of the piece is that Yves Klein used a lot of sponges in his paintings. And I thought how amusing it would be to show him leaping off the wall and landing in his sponges. So on the floor beneath the leaping figure is a second figure, which is derived from the paintings he did, where he would take, in performance art, he would take a nude model, woman, and paint her body in blue, and then move her around on a canvas to create shapes. And then he would attach these blue soaked sponges to the canvas as well. So that's what there's a figure on the floor that has these sponges on it, and he's leaping off the wall, landing
into his sponges. Oh, it's marvelous. It's marvelous. Now, a surprise in this exhibit, and to all of us today, as we work on getting it up, installed all together, is when we first, you and I talked about this exhibit, and we've known each other for a while, and you knew we had a marvelous sculpture by Mark de Souvreau, and you knew it got hit by an unfortunate soul in a truck. And you told me, you said, you know what, I'm going to do a de Souvreau piece. And I first thought you were kidding me. And then we talked again. And I thought he's very serious. He's going to do a Mark DeSuver piece, and we put it together for the first time today. You probably put together many times, but
Never.
see, so it was exciting for all of us. Let's talk about that before we close. Let's talk about that piece.
Okay.
Mark
Well,
DeSuver.
I have known about Mark DeSuver since back in the 1960s, when he lived in New York, and in the 70s, from when he had his terrible accident where his legs were crushed, and they thought he would never walk again. But being a man of steel,
Right. Exactly.
he outfoxed them all. And although he does walk with crutches, he was able to relearn how to walk. But I've always admired his work, the dynamics, the poetry that he can achieve with these massive steel beams and with these swinging telephone poles and all of these things is just amazing. And so for many, many years, I wanted to do a piece about Mark DeSuver, but it never sort of clicked or came clear in my mind. And then once I saw the Helmholtz piece and the idea of doing the show in the museum, there is the perfect thing. To do a piece about Mark DeSuver using the Helmholtz piece as a reference. And so, today we put it together for the first time. Scared the hell out of all of us.
It did. It did.
But
it's big and scary and heavy, and
it's glass also.
it's beautiful.
And one of the things that I wanted to mention in that regard is that when that person drove their truck into the DeSuver steel sculpture and destroyed it, it brought to mind a certain thing, because people have an enormous fear of using glass in outdoor art, in outdoor sculpture. Yet the windows in every building are glass, and they're, an eighth of an inch thick. And when I do glass in sculpture, it's 3/4 of an inch thick. It's 1 inch thick. It's 3 layers of 3/4. I did an outdoor piece in Pasadena, California, that's 3 layers of 3/4 inch glass laminated together. I mean, so if somebody wants to destroy art, they can, no matter what it's made of. But the idea of putting glass outside is no more, I've had pieces outdoors for 30 years that have held up beautifully. So I wanted to take that juxtaposition of being able to destroy a steel sculpture and showing that image can be done in glass and be lyrical and and beautiful, just as the steel is lyrical and beautiful in his piece.
I think you definitely proved that point, and I think that all of us who are involved, as many people are in Fort Wayne and the region, and thinking about new pieces of wonderful public art, should think of things like you make as being on the agenda to discuss. I think that'd be important. I would find it so beautiful to be able to drive through our city and walk through our downtown and see pieces by you, Steve, in glass and steel and wood all together, and they're just as safe, as you say, as anything in steel, aluminum, whatever you have.
Look at, somebody took a hammer to the Pietà, years ago. It's crazy, but I mean, it's no more fragile than anything else by somebody who is wantonly, crazily interested in destroying something. But on its own, it will stand beautifully forever.
The test of time. Steve, I want to thank you first of all, from travel from France to be here to work on this exhibit with us and to share this with us for the next several months. I love that. Thank you. I thank you for making time tonight. I know you're exhausted after a long day and week of installation. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with our audience. And to our audience members, thanks for listening.
Can I
Yes.
would like to thank the staff of Fort Wayne Museum of Art for being incredible in terms of the installation and being, right there, helping hand throughout the entire process. And without, Brian and Rachel and Lauren and Aaron, this would not have been possible. And you too, Charles.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I think I did one thing, but I wanted to be part, right? Well, thank you, my friend. It's good talking with you. And everybody, you want to get yourself down here and see this show. It is a stunning show. Please do come down after you see us talking like this or before. Come down and check this show out. Thanks and good evening.
Bye all.
Bye all.